is the Obstructed View podcast with Matt Mosley, and so happy to have Cam Stewart with me today, my daily cohort on ESPN Central Texas every day from 4 to 6, and then you hear him, the Cam Show. Well, Braden gets involved in that show, and there's a lot going on. Cam, this is probably, as we tape this, probably a little early in the day for you to spend some time with me, but I appreciate you doing it. And of course, at this time of day, I have a whole different persona, and I really, for Obstructed View and our listeners on the new podcast, this is when I really get very serious, and I take myself seriously, and I don't no funny stuff, right? So
Morning Mosley, yeah.
This is when I absolutely get very serious about things. So, good to be with you. And I'll just, since I can see that something says God Country, I just assume that's a very religious T-shirt that you have on. And I admire that about you. Oh, gosh, Notre Dame. It's very weird, all these different things that you.
Look, I went to a wedding there. I got a T-shirt.
It's
very comfortable.
You had a dad who went to Duke and maybe spent some time at UT.
Oh, well, that's
to Notre Dame. I mean, you need to kind of dig in.
The builder, he went everywhere, man. 4 different colleges, plus he likes he does a lot of Fargo business trips, so he likes getting some bison gear. He's got some cousins that went to BYU. He likes gives roots for BYU from time to time. Grandfather went to the Naval Academy, so we've got Navy stuff.
Too much. This is too much.
The apple doesn't fall far. Comparatively, I'm pretty good. I've abandoned the Duke thing that I was so big into as a kid. It's Baylor and a Notre Dame shirt.
All right, tell Mike to cut all that part. I did yesterday, Cam, and I got a couple Baylor topics for Obstructed View, and we love to kind of do things on the fly. Although, for the radio show, we put in hours, I know, together on the phone. But I did like this, and you follow the story. I love when you dig in. There's a couple things you dig in on. Obviously Patriots and Boston area sports, but also I think you like that I have friends in high places at ESPN who cover the high school recruiting game. And then you follow that closer than I do. And this name that I'm starting to hear a lot for 2025, AJ DeBonsa. Now, AJ is the number 1 recruit in the country, and he now has Baylor on his list of schools to visit. Now, Jerome Tang's on there early.
Yeah.
One of the first stops will be Manhattan, Kansas. Now, he ends his trip in October. It will really BYU, but the number 1, again, I love it up there, and the Mormons are good folks, and I even sometimes kind of think I could have been a good Mormon, but he's not going to go to BYU, all right? That's not the place the number 1 recruit in the country goes.
Right.
For some reason, they might go to Rutgers sometimes. I don't know what Rutgers has, but Rutgers must be paying huge NIL money, but they will go to Rutgers. And, let me ask you this. Have the Bears ever had the number 1 recruit in the entire country? That hasn't happened, has it?
No. And we talked about this with football. Obviously, rankings aren't forever. We haven't had them the whole time. But they have not had number 1. And I think the closest they've had is VJ Edgecombe coming in this year, which is he's 3 or 4, depending on what outlet you go by. Isaiah Austin was pretty high. He was in the top 10. Jacoby Walter and Keontae George are both kind of just outside that top 10 and between 10 and 25 or so.
Yeah.
So this would be the first one. And Trey Johnson, who well, they were on his path for a long time.
Yeah.
Before committing to UT, he was at one point the number 1 guy, and again, still by some publications, number 1 in this 24 class. So they've gotten close in the last few years, but this would be number one.
I tried to because Trey went to my daughter's high school and he led us to a state title. And I tried to stay away a little bit on that one. And I think the Baylor coaches were thinking maybe I should have leaned in a little more. Tell
Yeah.
me about Dubonsa. Like, what are we talking about? Because he looks lean, he looks dynamic. What size?
Yeah.
What are we looking at? Because this guy is in the next 6 months, all of America will start hearing his name. Right now, it's still more of that early on huge hoop heads who know
Yeah.
this guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you're looking at the top prospects now, Matt, like the really top 3 or 4 or 5 guys, gone are the days of centers being number one. No longer are the days that point guards are number one. They're going to be wings. Time in, time out. Even Trey Johnson, who we were just talking about, has some good size for a guard, about 6'6". That's like wing size, and that's what you're seeing with Dubonsa. He's 6'9". He's got a wingspan of over 7 feet, and he's just got a really smooth offensive game about him. You know, a guy who's not who knows kind of what his game is. He's not just a super athlete that jumps over everybody. While he is a great athlete, he's got a polished game, a good jump shot, can create off the dribble, shoot off the dribble. There's a lot of the comp I see when I watch his highlights. He looks like a Jason Tatum, a guy who can play inside out, offensively, and guard a couple different positions defensively. And obviously, that's more of a future prospect, the defensive side of the court. But he is long, he is smooth, and he's got a good shot about him. I think this is a guy who can score at all 3 levels at the next level, and that's why you see him as a number one guy. And typically, you know, when you look back in retrospect for the time of when you didn't have to go one and done, where you could go straight from high school to the pros, it feels like every 2 or 3 years we see some guy who's like, this guy didn't even need college. He could have gone right to the pros. We see it in guys like Zion Williamson is the name that comes to mind. And I think Dubonsa is close to having that kind of a status of, man, if this were 15 years ago, he could have just gone straight to the league and figured it out there. He's got that kind of body and he's got that kind of skill right now. I mean, he's number one for a reason. Any coach in the country could use a guy like this.
Okay, hearing you talk about Dubonsa reminds me of something, and this ties into some breaking news from the last 24 hours with Baylor. If I ask you, and let's go back, okay, I don't want you to just hear Portal, okay, because Portal has only been with us for whatever, 3 or 4 years. Who are the greatest, if we had to rank the greatest / most important transfers in Baylor history, who would it be? Who would it be? Who's the first name that comes to mind?
First name that comes to mind is Davion Mitchell.
Okay.
And I would think of he and MaCio Teague as 2 huge parts of the national championship team. So when we're talking most important guys, those are the first 2 I think of, although there is something to be said for Vinnie Johnson as a transfer from McLennan Community College. That counts. So that's you know, one of the great players ever to play for Baylor. He's got his number retired in Detroit. You know, that's an all-time legend, the microwave. But in terms of the importance, you know, unfortunately, Vinny's teams didn't do a lot. That's not his fault. Davion Mitchell came in and becomes the point guard of a national championship team. MaCio Teague is one of the most underrated players in the conference, if not the country, that year, for his shooting ability and really underrated defensive ability. Obviously, Mitchell is the defensive player of the year. And those 2 guys are what spring to mind for me. Adam Flagler became an All-American as a transfer from Presbyterian. He also had a big role on that 21 team off the bench. But Mitchell is the one for me. And what's crazy about his career, I think, so he comes in from Auburn. He is the point guard on that 2020 team. And you'll remember that, Matt. We weren't expecting a lot from that team. Expected to be good, solid, Scott Drew, right? But they all of a sudden just can't lose. They win whatever 20-something straight games. They're number one in the country for 5 straight weeks. And Davion was the point guard who was rather one-dimensional. He was a very good defender. He was a playmaker, but he didn't have much of a shot, not much of a scoring touch or a scoring game. And that all changed the next year. They attribute a lot of this to COVID and not being able to do a lot, spending a lot of time in the gym. Mitchell became a knockdown three-point shooter. Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua, another transfer. He became a real impact offensive player as well, having that time in the gym. And you look at the last 4 or 5 weeks of that championship season, no disrespect to Jared Butler at all. He's one of the all-time greatest players to play at Baylor, but Davion was the hottest player on that team.
Yeah.
And he was, I don't want to say carrying as if he was the only guy on the team, but he was leading that team into the championship run. And he was the one who was the top 10 pick in the draft. So for me, I can't look any further than Davion Mitchell. But man, there have been a lot of impact transfers in the Scott Drew era. Before that was easy to do. I mean, we're still talking about those guys as coming in and sitting out a year. Mitchell and Tchamwa-Tchatchoua and Maceo Teague on that team and Adam Flagler. All those guys had to sit out a year. And there's a laundry list of those guys through the Scott Drew era that had to do that. And it's not the case anymore. And I think Scott is still doing pretty well in the portal game, but he was doing it before it was cool.
The only player you did not mention is the player who has just been put in the Baylor Athletics Hall of Fame. And I would like you to join me in welcoming Ekpe Udoh to the Baylor Athletics Hall of Fame. And that was a great transfer, an extremely important transfer. What's that?
Like that's got to be in your top 3 or 4.
Yes.
Right. I mean, that's a key guy for an Elite 8 team that probably should have been in the Final Four, but for a couple of calls there, lottery pick, top 10 pick. Yeah, that's a good one. Ekpe, absolutely.
And Ekpe.
Sorry, I always say it. Ekpe. This is before my Baylor time. I was watching him.
He spells it EPKE. So yeah, but he was so great, and like it is funny how someone, and we've seen it over the years with some Big Ten players. We may see it right now with like Luka Garza and others. That obviously our man who was at Gonzaga forever from Richardson Pierce, that are just awesome college players, and it just doesn't translate. What their skill set is that makes them brilliant and great in college. It can't work in the NBA. Interesting, and what I've always thought was really cool about Ekpe, he does not make it, as a lottery pick. It just didn't, game didn't develop. He goes overseas, and then he comes back and has kind of a late NBA push there in Utah as just kind of a scrappy off the bench rebounder, defender. In a sense, he just kind of leaned into what he was really good at before, rather than try to do what he was not going to do, which was become like some kind of shooter. That was never going to happen. So,
by the way, I'm sorry, because I think you make a good point there. That's happened to a lot of Scott Drew guys with Ekpe, and I mean guys who aren't superstars but are playing rotationally in the NBA. Ish Wainwright, Royce O'Neal.
Royce was a transfer. Royce was another transfer.
Yeah, from Denver. Yeah.
Taurean Prince was a transfer.
Yes, that's right. He was an early on transfer, right?
Yeah.
I think technically Jared Butler might be considered a transfer. He started the school year at Alabama, but never played for them. But you're right. Prince, I think after 1 year, transferred to Baylor.
Do you think Jared, he got there early to start at Alabama, and that had to be really sad if Scott to lose out on Jared Butler, because they had literally known him since he was in 7th or 8th grade. there's pictures of him, hanging out with Scott when he's in 8th grade. Do you think Jared Butler, like a lot of these kids that are going off to school right now, and my daughter will be next year at this time, do you think Jared Butler pledged a fraternity when he got first?
You think so? Like first week?
Is there a chance he's a Phi Delta? We just don't know it. Like he was a
There
Phi
could
Delta in
be.
Alabama.
Baylor doesn't let you rush until the spring, so maybe that's why he picked Alabama initially. Who knows?
Still
Rush right
can't
away.
believe, deferred rush is great because again, for some of us show up from small towns like I did, I had no clue what it is. I just remember some KOT asking me to a Christmas tree lighting, and I was like, I don't know why this guy's asking me to go to this. This seems weird. This seems weird. And it turned out like KOT was like a big thing. They were, and still to this day, they're a good fraternity. But I just remember thinking, this is weird. I don't know. I don't know. I've never had someone ask me to a Christmas tree lighting. The Obstructed View podcast, and God, was such a familiar face. Cam Stewart, who's had run into some car issues lately, and I think on the radio show today we'll delve into that, see if he's made a certain call. We were yesterday. A lot of people were weighing in on what Cam should do on the folks he bought a car from recently, and the car has really the car has not worked out for him at all. Cam, is that situation headed toward closure, or is it still hanging in the balance?
Well, we've got a bit of a roadmap, but it's not it's not great. So I'm gonna bring it to a dealership, actually, get a second opinion, second quote.
One of our friends, maybe?
I would hope so, but it is a Honda, so I don't know that we have one of our friends Honda.
They all work on those.
Okay.
So you don't have to take it to you can, but you don't have to take a Honda to a Honda dealership.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Then yes, definitely with one of our friends. So I'm gonna get a second opinion, and if it's the same thing, which is running me $7 or $8 grand, I'm just gonna say how much will you give me for it, and we will be back on the trail looking for at worst something that can get me through a couple of months.
All right. One more thing I wanted to throw it at you, because this is fun, and I love having you on my pod. I don't think you've asked me to come on your pod, but it's something I don't, certainly don't worry about. But no, you have Steven Simcox to talk about.
Sometimes,
yeah. You just skip right over me.
Great.
He is great. Just what a guy. Okay, but as we look at the Big 12 and where they came down in the top 25, the Big 12 rankings, and I think we all expected Utah to check in, pretty early if they're going to be the top representative for the Big 12, and I think they did come in at 12. I'm doing this off memory. You may be able to look this up real quick, given your age. But then there's a run on Big 12 schools. And again, it's fun for the K-States and the Kansases of the world and Oklahoma State. But to me, it sort of speaks to like nobody knows what to do with this conference. It's kind of like, well, okay, we've run out of kind of the major Big Ten and SEC brands, and we think Mizzou might be really good this year, so put them wherever, like at 11 or and then now, okay, what about all those Big 12 schools? And and so boom, 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 there's a big run on the Big 12 schools. And unfortunately, the run did not include the Bears. It also did not include TCU. And it did not include one of the great offseason coaches in America. I mean, Joey knows how to stir it up in the offseason. I do not think the Red Raiders made it on. So let me just ask you about those three schools real quick. Of the schools, to me, this has a smell of a good locked on type topic for you. Of the schools that did not, and maybe we have to almost in our minds go to, others receiving votes. There was a time at Baylor, the OVs or whatever they used to call it. It's like, oh my gosh, Baylor got 2 votes. I mean, I would like to think we've kind of aged out of that, but
Hopefully.
we may have gone back into it, honestly. Like I think if I saw some votes, I'd be like, yes, yes. Of those teams, Colorado. Now I meant to say, like, Arizona was also one of the schools in the top 25. So all those schools I mentioned are in the top 25. Of the others, BYU, Baylor, TCU, Texas Tech. I have a hard time. Who knows? UCF is recruiting well and looked a little
Mhm.
stronger as they finished last year. Didn't look as beaten down as you might expect. Part of that, I think they got a quarterback. They got the quarterback back, and that helped them. Almost knocked off. I think they should have almost knocked. They should have knocked off Oklahoma at one point last year. So,
Yeah.
of those others, who's got your attention? And do you have any scenario in your mind where, like, we could make an argument that the Bears could slip ahead of, like, Tech or TCU or UCF? Like, where, what's our hierarchy of those others? And do we really have any clue?
Well, first I'll say about Baylor, there is absolutely a world where they are better than TCU this year. I know they don't like beating TCU, but there is a world where they're a better team. I don't. I think there's a lot of uncertainty up in Fort Worth, just as much as there is at Baylor. And they're coming off a year where they didn't make a bowl game either at 5-7. So I think that's possible. Tech, I like better than Baylor for this year. And two teams I'm looking at that did not get in the rankings for the Big 12. West Virginia, that's a team coming off a
Mm,
9-win season
mm,
and brings a lot back. I really like Garrett Green, their quarterback. He does not get the pub that a lot of these other Big 12 quarterbacks do, but he's pretty darn efficient, man. And so I like what they bring back. And the other one I'm really surprised is on the outside looking in, and they did receive a lot of votes, is Iowa State. Iowa State is a team that was in the Big 12 hunt really until probably about the beginning of November last year. Up and down season, didn't end great, but they know what they have at quarterback with Rocco Becht, a guy who can get out of the pocket a little bit. And I don't mean this as a demerit, but a good game manager. They have they had a good defense that couldn't rush the passer, and Matt Campbell has been pretty adamant about how that pass rush is going to be better this year. They had a great defensive backfield. TJ Tampa was one of the best in the country at cornerback. And that said, they're even better offensively this year than I think they are on defense. They have got some big time weapons coming back, like Jalen Noel. Again, I like what they've got at quarterback. I think Iowa State can make a real run at the Big 12
mm.
championship this year as a team that no one's talking about. I see them as pretty similar on the same plane as Kansas State, and Kansas State's getting a lot of flowers. Iowa State beat them on the road last year, and they have more of a commodity, a known commodity anyway, at quarterback. We all love Avery Johnson getting out of the pocket, and he's exciting, but we don't know what he is for a 12-game
Mm-mm.
season. And while Rocco Becht doesn't light it up, he's not going to be a Heisman finalist. You know what you got out of him, and I like Iowa State. Nothing against Kansas State or Kansas, but I think those are bigger question marks than I think people are giving them credit for. And I like Iowa State a lot, and I think West Virginia is going to be in the rankings this year. I think they're a team that is going to be solidly in the top half of what is going to be a quite competitive Big 12.
Well, and to your point, Cam, great job bringing up West Virginia, because as we thought we may have seen, we may have seen the last of Aranda last year. As you walked off the field, it was Neil Brown, the West Virginia coach, who took him in his arms. He said, "Dave, you know, you just never know." Kind of sympathy. He was able to show him some empathy. Dave brought that into the. One thing I love about Dave. I mean, there's some things that I wish he could do better. But boy, when push came to shove, and Dave needed to beg for his job, he did it. Okay, it
Mhm.
wasn't like, I'm too good to beg. I'm too good to that. He showed up
Ain't too
at
proud to beg.
he was at Max with donuts that morning of the game. I saw him in the Letter Winners Association, the B Association, an hour before kickoff, in there addressing the crowd. And all the women, including my mom, made me feel bad. They're like, they just come up to me. I love him. I love him. How could you call for his job? And I that was, it was annoying because I mean, I thought he had earned the opinion that they probably should get a new coach. But
Yeah.
I think sometimes people confuse what we do, Cam, since we're on the affiliate, or we're not the affiliate, we're the flagship. I think they are shocked sometimes. It is funny. All year we can share our opinions, right? This looks bad. This guy's looks bad. La, 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 la. And the one time I finally said, I think it's probably time to make a move on Twitter. Like, people kind of reacted like, what has he done? Why is Mosley saying that? It was just like kind of an interesting. And to me, I thought it was kind of obvious. Like, I didn't think, oh gosh.
What's funny is this week, Matt, I've been hearing from some players and people who are around the practices, and they're saying, "Oh, the energy is just so much different. It's night and day from last year. There's a real energy on these sidelines and these practices." And we had talked about this, and I know our friend Drake pointed it out a lot, but I think he had a point here. It's like when Baylor would make a big play, you'd look down to the sidelines and like it was dead down there. And so you're like, what's going on here? And when you would bring that up on Twitter or on the radio, get chastised for it big time. And now, because we're a couple weeks away from a new season, you're allowed to say, "Oh yeah, the energy wasn't great last year." It's just like the same thing with Aranda. It's like if they start win or now that he's made some changes and they're getting ready for a new season, it's okay to be like, "Well, yeah, Dave Aranda should have been fired last year," or "I'm surprised he kept this job." And if they keep winning, Matt, it's going to be the same thing of this guy was dead in the water. You weren't allowed to say it, but we all knew it,
Well, like I like that Baylor literally's response to just getting killed by members of like one site, or just like, you know what? Let's go partner with them. Let's just go. Let's go. Why don't we do a partnership? Let's bring them in. Maybe we can, maybe we could like have a little more say in what they do. Now that will be interesting. Because we'll see. Some people don't like being coached, but I think people will be open to being coached to a certain extent. Cam, I didn't want to tell you as we sign off, met a buddy of yours over online. Sounds weird meeting people online, but just in a very email type situation, because of my daughter I got a Baylor visit coming up. Maybe it'll coincide with the daughter of Deion Miner, the famous Baylor track athlete, Bailey Miner, coming to town next month. Official visit with Michael Ford and the gang. But my daughter's coming in for a visit that Air Force weekend. And in setting that up, I am visiting with a gentleman named Walker Talbert.
Yeah.
And boy, I thought that was neat because not everybody from Baylor, is always like leads with you. But Walker was just very like, oh man, worked with Cam, and he was he's a listener to our show. And so I kind of told him, I said, hey, check out the podcast and all that. But anyway,
Walker's great. He's one of my favorite people there.
Good. I just thought.
And you're right. Most people do not lead with, most Baylor people do not lead with, oh yeah, I know Cam. That's, as we found out, most do not try to lead with that.
No, that's just one department, sir. Most departments love Cam, including the old journalism department. You and young Braden, Drake, all of y'all that won awards over the years. Well, okay, this is the Obstructed View podcast. Cam, thank you, buddy. Always fun. I love that you're there in the precincts of the Temple. It's I love the studios. My man Mike. Thoughts with Zach right now. He's got some stuff going on. But man, he'll be back with us soon. And if he's watching this, Zach, we miss you and want to get you back in the saddle as soon as possible. All right. This has been the Obstructed View podcast. For Cam Stewart, I'm Matt Mosley. Good night, everybody.
We are Rogue Media Sports.